Hi everyone, my name is Meeta Sahni and I am the CEO and owner of the Main Group. For those of you who don't know us, we are consultants in talent attraction and we support both the charitable sector and the commercial sector. So welcome to the Candid CEO podcast, and I'm really pleased today to be able to welcome our guest, Richard Hawkes. Hi Richard.
Hi Meeta, thank you for having me.
A real pleasure. Thank you for being on board. So for our audience, Richard Hawkes is Chief Exec of the British Asian Trust. And Richard is going to be spending the next 20 minutes with me, just taking us through his journey and what he's now doing at the British Asian Trust. And also, because of the time that we're recording this during the COVID-19 pandemic, maybe a little bit about how the British Asian Trust and the charitable sector have been impacted. Richard, you are so qualified for this conversation because your experience and history in the not-for-profit sector is immense. Is it okay if we start with a little bit about you and your background?
Yes, of course. So I've worked in the charity sector for about 25 years now, maybe a little bit longer even. I was very fortunate. In my late 20s, I was appointed to be the director of a small international charity, and it was part of a UK disability organisation.
Right.
And I was appointed to be the director. So I was given this incredible opportunity at quite a young age to be the director of a small organisation, which was so small that I was the only member of staff when I started. And I was basically told that they'd set aside enough salary to pay me a salary for 3 years, and I had 3 years to work out what the organisation could do, develop a strategy, start establishing some programs, raise the funds to get those programs going, and include in the fundraising to be able to cover my own salary. So it certainly sort of sharpened the focus for those 3 years. But it was an amazing experience, and we did some amazing things in that organisation.
And you learned so much in that time. You literally had to wear every hat in that.
Just absolutely everything. So at a very early stage of my career, I was learning about fundraising, program development, governance, how to write the annual report, how to work with the Charity Commission, how to work with Companies House, all of the different aspects of running a charity, which have then, that knowledge has then been tremendously useful as my career has developed and I moved on to other organisations. So from there, I went to a very large international NGO where I was the international director of programs for VSO. So I was responsible for VSO's programs in about 40 countries around the world. Had a brilliant time there. And after that, I was then appointed to be chief executive of Scope, which is one of the largest charities in the country. So when I was there, it was over 100 million turnover, 3,500 members of staff. So a big charity, but it was only focused on the UK. So that was really the only time in my career that I've done a job that wasn't about working internationally and international development. So, but had an amazing 5-6 years at Scope, and then came to the British Asian Trust about 4.5 years ago. And then at the British Asian Trust, I've just been able to use all of the skills and experiences that I'd been able to build up in all of those other organizations to hopefully of great benefit to the trust and what we've been trying to achieve there.
So the British Asian Trust has been was set up by His Royal Highness Prince of Wales in 2007. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Just over 12 years ago. So it was a combined initiative. It was the Prince of Wales came together with some of the very successful members of the British Asian diaspora. The intention being to create an organization that would make the biggest difference possible across South Asia. And so it brought together people of Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, and Sri Lankan origin to then create an organization that would galvanize the diaspora community here and others that were interested in the region to really try to make the biggest difference possible across those countries in the region.
And since you've been chief exec, which I believe was from 2015 onwards, you have really taken this charity and its profile and its success from strength to strength.
I would honestly say the organisation had been on a great growth trajectory anyway. It was, it had achieved some amazing things, and over the last 3 or 4 years, we've been able to continue that growth, and we've been able to really expand our programs, really make a difference for the lives of more people, expand our supporter base, and so on. So I think the organisation has such incredible potential that I guess in many ways almost anybody could have come along as the chief exec and just tried to bring all of those things together to really take the organisation where it's going.
You're underselling yourself there.
I quite genuinely believe when you look at that board of trustees and you look at the supporter base that we have and the tremendous support that we get from the Prince, that this role genuinely has been about applying, try to think strategically about how you bring all of those incredible assets together, and then making it happen with the great team of people that we've got. So
well, I have to say, reading about the charity and the fact that it's there to tackle poverty, inequality, and injustice in South Asia, I mean, that is just so powerful and so impactful on the lives of everyone, in South Asia. So it's huge, and your engagement and your passion just shines through. So for me, speaking with you and getting your insight is just fantastic, invaluable for me.
That's good to hear. I mean, I'm very lucky. I've had, throughout the 25 years, I've had such a close connection with that region. So I've traveled many times to the countries in the region, and I've had a very close relationship with members of the diaspora community here as well. So in many ways, it's the perfect job for somebody with the passions that I have.
Fantastic. So I call this the Candid CEO podcast, because I think that for chief execs of organizations, whether you're a chief exec of a large organization or some of the smaller ones, I think for our viewers and listeners, I think having a really candid conversation at this level is so valuable, because I think everyone thinks that chief exec have all the answers, that they were always at chief exec level and that it came easy. But we know, and that's not, that's not the reality. There's a journey, there's a process, and there's a lot of thinking. So I really want to get an understanding of your why and sort of what brought you to where you are. And we've understood the journey, but can you tell me a little bit about what your driving forces have been during your career?
I guess it's been very simple for me. The overwhelming one, which is, I was very fortunate at a very, very early age. So when I was a student, I sort of accidentally got elected to be a sabbatical officer in the Students' Union, the university that I was at Manchester University. And so I was on the Student Union Executive Committee there. And I always remember somebody coming in from another country to the Students' Union and just talking to me about the role that I was able to play in making his situation better. And it had never entered my head that I could do that. That I was in a position where I could make somebody else's life better. And it just had such a powerful impact on me. And it wasn't about, we all have a responsibility to do this or whatever. It was just that awakening that we are all in a position where we can have an impact on other people's lives. And that came together even more powerfully. A number of years later, I was working in Vienna in Austria. And it was around the time of the war in Yugoslavia. And there were a lot of displaced young people from the countries of former Yugoslavia that were coming into Europe and into Austria. And again, I started to realize that I was in a position where there were people whose lives were in a very poor position. And so things needed to happen to make their lives better. There were organizations like governments or some of the international bodies that had the power to improve situations, and there were donors and funders that had money that could make things better.
Yeah.
I realized if you're there in the middle of all of that, and you're the person or part of an organization that can bring that together and convene the people that have money with the people that have power to bring about positive change for people whose lives need to be changed for the better, then that can be incredibly rewarding, and it's a massive personal driver for me. So quite genuinely, the driver is about waking up every day and genuinely wanting to change the world and make the world a better place.
Well, that gives me goosebumps. That's very powerful. And I think for our audience and people watching this, it really is knowing that we can all do that in our own way, in our organizations. And I think that for commercial organizations, it's important to know that even though we're not working in a not-for-profit environment, we can still add that value by understanding how our value creation is received. So what people actually need.
It's really important to, we should never think that it's charities and NGOs that can change the world, and that the only way that commercial organizations can do that is to support those charities and those NGOs. Of course, by working in partnership with charities, massive change can be brought about, but also fundamentally the way that corporates behave, the way that their missions are set out, the values of those corporates, that can have the most powerful change of all. And we see it, a lot of the role of the private sector has changed enormously over the last 10 or 15 years, and the relationship with the charity sector, that they've both changed enormously. And so it's perfectly possible, and many companies are absolutely driven by a sense of purpose, as well as needing to make a profit or wanting to make a profit. And the impact that can be made there is immensely powerful.
I love that, the sense of purpose and the impact from that is key. And so many, and the millennial workforce, that for them, that is so front and center as well. So I mean, that's
absolutely,
the not-for-profit sector is so popular for millennials because of that. And actually both sides of the coin can really instill that in them and achieve that. So thank you. And what would you say have been your main challenges in your career over the years?
I think, one of the biggest challenges I have often faced is that I believe that the sector that I work in, I believe that the charity sector exists to bring about change. We're in a world that is changing, and we exist to bring about change. And if we're going to be relevant, it means that we as organizations have to keep changing as well. And so I've always been driven by this real desire to strengthen and change the organizations that I've had the good fortune to lead, whether that's doing a startup and then growing it, whether it's transforming an organization, growing a large organization, growing and changing the British Asian Trust. And all of that involves change. And when you're trying to drive change, that there are always challenges there. Because even if all of the changes you're trying to drive are the right ones, it's still absolutely crucial that you recognize the impact that's going to have on all of the different people involved. And organizational change can always be difficult, and getting organizations to be stronger or different, to be able to play a more powerful role in driving organizational change, can be very difficult. And I think those are, the challenges always come, I guess, when you learn with the benefit of hindsight. But when you get things wrong, like you get your communications wrong, or you're not totally transparent in the way that you're communicating things, or I think it's really important that you try to understand how different people are going to be impacted by the changes that you're trying to drive, to put yourself in those positions so that you can then work with them to embrace the change. And I think the challenges very often just come from either a resistance to change or poor leadership in bringing about change in all of those different areas that I've mentioned.
Yeah, I think your change is so emotive as well, isn't it? It's necessary, as you said. Staying relevant is key, but people, I think, are so resistant, even without necessarily realizing why they're resistant. So, as you said, that strong leadership is.
Well, and also, I'm very aware myself. I think every day at work for 25 years, I've talked about the need to change. that we're a sector that's got to bring about change, that the organizations need to change, that we need to embrace change as individuals, we need to embrace change. And yet for me personally, the minute something changes to one of my routines, I get full of angst about it. You expect everything to be in the same place that it always is, or to do things at the same time. And so change has that impact on people. If you're trying to drive change in an organization, you need to really appreciate that people are not necessarily deliberately resistant to change, but change is a difficult thing to embrace.
Yeah, that's so true. And they talk about becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable, and that change is the only constant and things like that. But all the phrases are great, but the reality of helping people along through the journey to always staying relevant, always being ahead of what the organization needs, it's so key. And it's interesting to hear you say that, because I think I'm sure many chief execs and leaders of organizations and people will say the same. Having looked back, what would you say are your achievements that stand out for you with all of this change and the areas you've worked in mind?
I mean, I think I've been incredibly lucky to have chosen to work for some incredible organizations that have some incredible people in them. And for me, as I've said, I've always been driven by trying to galvanize the individuals and the assets that an organization has to be able to then bring about real change and influence, that bring about the real changes and influence that we exist to bring about. And so when I look back at some of the successes of some of those organizations, and it gives you such an immense sense of satisfaction. For example, years ago, that first organization, Sense International, that I worked for, we played a role in driving new legislation on disability in India and in Romania. And years later, that legislation change is still having a massive impact on the lives of thousands and thousands of disabled people in those countries. When I was at Scope, we played a massive role in influencing the Care Act and having an influence on the way that social care is funded and specific aspects of the Care Act. And obviously we've got a long way to go to get social care where it needs to be in this country, but to have played a role in improving that was,
place, aren't we? So you started that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when I look back, it's often some of the more complex partnerships that I've been able to play a role in, when we've brought together some brilliantly innovative cross-sectoral partnerships, or brought organizations together in coalitions. I've had the very good fortune to have led a number of sector bodies. I was chair of the umbrella body for all of the UK international NGOs. And to be able to bring all of those organizations together to then influence for change. Many years ago, that sector was responsible for getting the government to commit to spending 0.7% of GDP on international development. And being able to do that, sometimes you forget in the charity sector, it's not always about going and directly supporting a beneficiary. It's often about the slog of bringing organizations together and years of hard work to bring about change in government laws, in government commitments that can then have the most profound effect for years to come. At the British Asian Trust, we've been involved in an amazing initiative called the Development Impact Bond, which has brought together 7 or 8 partners, cross-sectoral partners, to look at a way of funding education in India in a totally different way to traditional philanthropy and grant giving. And again, that's been incredibly exciting to be a part of an initiative like that, which can quite genuinely have a very powerful influence on the way that philanthropy and development works in the future.
And
so
innovate.
Sorry, I missed that, Meeta.
Sorry, I was just saying, to be able to innovate new ways of sourcing funding and more consistent funding, perhaps, as well.
Absolutely. And I think that so innovation, of course, innovation should be at the heart of the charity sector. I think if we exist to change things, if the world was perfect, you wouldn't need charities to to exist. And the world isn't perfect, and charities exist to try and change things and make things better. And we can only do that if we're innovating. And if we're thinking differently. And I've been very fortunate. An organization like the British Asian Trust, innovation is part of the DNA, because the entrepreneurs, the British Asian entrepreneurs that were involved in setting it up.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of, innovation, looking at doing things differently, convening cross-sectoral partnerships. It's things like that have given me the greatest satisfaction when I look back.
That's fantastic, and adds so much power to the organisation going forward to be able to affect change consistently and continually.
Yeah.
No, that brings me to where we are at the moment, and we can't ignore the COVID-19 pandemic that's upon us at the moment. How has that impacted you guys at the British Asian Trust? How have you been managing that?
I mean, look, it's had an absolutely immense impact on us, like it has on just about every organisation in the world. For us specifically, I mean, first of all, the most powerful impact that it's had on us is the devastating impact that is happening across South Asia, where I think at the moment we haven't seen the full impact from a health point of view, but we're certainly seeing the economic disaster. I mean, literally hundreds of millions of people in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka who've lost their jobs. They're people who are daily labourers. They're dependent on a daily wage. And when there's a lockdown and the economy stops, they lose their job. They don't have any money. They can't feed themselves and their families. And the consequences of that are absolutely devastating. And so for an organisation that exists to make things better in that region, suddenly things are in a devastating position. And we always know that whenever there's a crisis, it's the poorest people that will be affected the most. And so obviously on our programs, the nature of our programs, the way that we're supporting people, we've had to change direction very quickly and repurpose ourselves and really look at now the scale that we're going to need to be able to achieve at in the future. We're also in a position, because our supporter base is the British Asian community, and everybody will be aware that the impact in this country on the British Asian community has also been absolutely devastating. There's a disproportionate numbers of BME people that have been affected by COVID. And so obviously that has a huge impact. And so we've been doing a lot of work trying to understand that, engaging with Number 10 and with Public Health England, and convening groups of our supporters to be able to input to the work that the government is doing there. And so that's had an impact on our programs and our sort of beneficiaries, and it's had an impact on our supporter base. But then also, it's had an impact on the organisation as well, where overnight we had to start working remotely and digitally, and the teams having to work in a very different way. We've had to furlough a number of our great colleagues, and so in effect we're in this place where demand for our services and what we do is up and greater than ever, and yet the organisation is trying to get through a very, very challenging time. So yes, it's had a big impact, but at the same time there are positives coming out of this as well, and we're an organisation that can adapt very quickly. And so
and you've launched an emergency appeal, haven't you? Within that time, with all the challenges, you've launched an emergency appeal. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so we launched an emergency appeal just over 3 weeks ago. And it's been absolutely fantastic, the response to that. I mean, it was launched by the Prince of Wales, who very generously made a donation into that appeal himself. And then our supporters have been quite unbelievable, really. And at the moment, that appeal is now in less than 4 weeks has raised over £800,000. Which is absolutely amazing, and we're working with organisations doing emergency relief work in the countries where we work, and the fact that we're going to be able to give them proper funding and support at a decent scale is absolutely tremendous, and a great recognition of the supporter base that we're lucky to have. Well,
I'm definitely going to add that link to this podcast when I send it out. And
thank you very much. Thank you.
We can continue to do that good work that you've started.
That would be great. Thank you very much indeed.
It's all about the team effort, especially at the moment, everyone pulling together and just helping each other through, isn't it?
Yeah, totally.
And how do you see the funding, the impact of funding into the charitable sector shifting in 2021? It's obviously going to have an impact. What are your thoughts in that space, and what advice would you give out to other charities?
I mean, look, there are big changes that are happening, and the nature of the way that people give. I mean, we have to recognise that people's ability to give has been massively affected.
Yeah.
And when people are worried about the economy and they're worried about their own family situations, giving to charity isn't going to be front of mind and a top priority. And so charities have to work even harder to demonstrate to people the value that we can bring, the value for money that we can that we can deliver. I think we're going to see, or we have been seeing, an increasing a change where people want to give charity closer to home rather than thinking internationally. And again, I think that's something I completely understand. But at the same time, an organization like ours has to keep reminding everyone that, this is a global situation and there are people living in absolute abject poverty, and we can do something to help them. And so we have a responsibility to keep reminding people of that. And then obviously,
pennies make a huge difference in these other countries. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a lot either, does it?
No, it absolutely doesn't.
Yeah.
But I think the charity sector needs to, as a sector overall, we need to change very quickly and look at our income sources. And we know we raise a lot of money from events, and all of our events have been cancelled this year, and so we've lost a lot of income as a result of that. And so we very quickly started to put a program of events online, and we've been delivering webinars and finding other ways of engaging with our supporters. And so I think the organizations that are able to change direction very quickly and adapt and have agility will be able to survive this, because there are people out there that want to give money still. We just got to keep working harder to get that money. And charities have an absolute responsibility to be able to demonstrate to an individual who has given money how we are spending that money effectively, and that every penny of that money is being spent to deliver a great outcome. So we just have to keep working harder to demonstrate that to everybody.
Yeah, very much. You said about the need for the British Asian Trust and for the charitable sector to be going great guns and pushing harder is no greater than now, and yet we're doing it with a hand tied behind our back with so many furloughed. And how has the government grant, the 750 million that was given out to charities, how has that impacted your organisation?
So there's no direct impact of that for the British Asian Trust, because that 750 million was for organisations working in the UK. So none of that funding was specifically for international charities. However, the government initiatives like the furlough scheme have helped us enormously. And so, we've been able to take advantage of that, like many other charities have. So the government the initiatives have definitely helped us. But that 750 million was targeted very much at organisations working in the UK.
For the UK.
Yes.
Yeah, understood.
Yeah.
Well, I really, commend everything that you're doing, and however we can help to continue the message and to spread it as far as we can, we will do that. And I really appreciate you opening up your thoughts and your experiences for our audience, because everyone has their own journey, and it can be quite lonely in the chief exec position. You can't always share your worries, your concerns. We almost have to be the finished article, and we have our board and so on. But actually hearing, CEO to CEO talking about challenges and the fact that we just talk, we work it out, we take advice, we collaborate, and that's what brings out success is very refreshing.
You're absolutely right. It can be a lonely position at times, but then equally it can be it can be the most satisfying role in the world. So.
Yeah. And what advice would you give for somebody that would want to grow into a role of chief exec? What advice would you give out to?
I mean, I think you said it right at the start, where there's an expectation, and very often we put this expectation on ourselves that the chief exec is expected to have all the answers to everything, and usually the chief exec will have the answers to nothing, or to very little. It's the role of the chief exec is to get the organization working at its absolute best, and work out how you get the dynamics between individuals to work brilliantly, how you build great teams, and to sort of recognize that everybody in an organization can have brilliant ideas and can have the answers to things. And if you as the chief exec think that you're the person that's going to do that, then that's a pretty guaranteed failure heading your way. So it's absolutely about getting the most out of everybody and building those teams and recognizing that that's your job, to be the sort of the convener of the answers and not the provider of them all. That's
a very powerful statement, really empowering our people to feel confident to share what they have. The expertise is a group effort, isn't it? That you then as a leader define and take forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Through your people. So it's full circle, symbiotic relationship between.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's what an organization is. It's people, you know. So,
yeah. And that actually comes back to the beginning where we talked about having that sense of purpose. Yeah. And if we have that defined, as you've so demonstrated in talking today, everybody can really aspire to that. So that's really powerful.
I think that's where the chief exec does have a responsibility to ensure that there is a clear sense of purpose and direction for the organization that can then be communicated really easily to everybody, so that the whole organization can understand that and get behind it.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, Richard, I said I was going to keep you for 20 minutes and you've kindly given me 30, so I apologize for running over, but it's been absolutely insightful and so interesting to hear your journey, the journey of the British Asian Trust, and also the impact that you've had on the charitable sector and the charitable sector has had on you. Yeah. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's been good to talk all of those things through with you, Meeta. Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, take care and all the best, and most importantly, stay safe.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Richard. All the best.